Welcome to today's edition of the Author's Corner, brought to you by KNEO 91.7 FM, The Word, and I'm Roberta Foster. Today I welcome Kari Baker to Author's Corner, and she's written the book Finding Kind, Discovering Hope and Purpose While Loving Kids with Invisible Neurological Differences. It's published by Blue Hat Publishing, and Kari will tell us more about how to find the book at the end of the program. Kari Baker has always loved a good plan, but when her only son Brady was diagnosed with autism in 2014 and ADHD in 2016, her plans for a typical parenting experience were shaken to the core. Her journey started with all the pain, uncertainty, and isolation that so many special needs parents encounter, but along the way, she found faith, community, and joy in surrendering to God's design. And Kari is a Christian author, speaker, and podcaster, and she's an avid blogger on the topics of faith, special needs parenting. So, Kari, we talked about the fact that kids with invisible neurological differences is kind of the acronym for KIND. So, how did you come up with that?
Well, honestly, that was a God moment for me. I started writing in 2018, kind of about all of the hard stuff that I had gone through as a parent, from the diagnosis through, all of the isolation and some of the shame and confusion that I was going through. And I started writing during that time. And the acronym came to me because I was thinking about the fact that my son looks just like every other kid that you would see on the street. So sometimes, while I am so grateful for all the things that my son can do, and the things that he's not challenged with, sometimes when others can't perceive that there's a difference in a child, there's a little less grace that's given. And so I was writing about the fact that his autism and ADHD is really invisible until you start working with him in school or in a conversation. And I feel like God put that acronym in my lap, but honestly, I did not know what to do with it for the longest time. So I wrote a lot during that time. So my son was about 7 years old, and I gave copies of what I'd written to my husband, and he read it, and he just said, Kari, this just sounds like it's really hard to be Brady's mom. And that is not what I wanted Brady to hear or the world to hear. And so I stopped writing. I kind of put KIND away. I did get the website, KIND Family's domain name, but I walked away from it for several years. And as my faith began to grow and I started to see all of the ways that God had been pulling me toward him, had been providing all of these little miracles in our life, I realized that the thing that was missing from my writing was God. So that's really when I took it back up again. I actually started thinking about it as, well, maybe I'll write a devotional. But I really felt like some of those harder stories still needed to be told, because those were the stories I looked for when I was going through the experience at first, and I couldn't find them. So I had the opportunity, that was another God moment, to sell the financial services practice I was part of for 15 years. And I just felt like God was opening that door for me to really pour myself into KIND Families and get the story told in the way that he wanted me to tell it.
Well, you mentioned that during that period of time, your faith grew. So tell us, what was your relationship with God like before you realized Brady had autism, and how did that relationship with him change?
So I had been raised Presbyterian, so I went to Sunday school, and I kind of knew all the book stuff about God and Jesus. I went to church on Christmas Eve and Easter and that sort of thing. But I never knew that you could have a relationship with Jesus, that God loved you so much and loves everyone so much that he's constantly chasing after us. And I got to a point in my journey with my son where I was running so hard and so fast to try to change all the things that I didn't feel like were fair in my life. And I finally hit a point of exhaustion, and I turned to the church that was in my community and started attending services because I frankly just didn't know where else to go. I didn't know where else to turn. And now I know that, that was God pulling me in. So I started going to services, and I was just shocked that these sermons seemed like they were written for me. And I'm sure a lot of the believers out there have seen this happen multiple times, but for me, that was a new thing.
Sure.
So, and then I got an email about joining a Bible study. And I will be honest with you, Roberta, I, at the time, thought Bible studies were for a bunch of old ladies that sat around in rocking chairs, and I never thought it would be something applicable to my life, but something God, Holy Spirit, pushed me into this Bible study. And I was just amazed at the women around the table that they just had this passion for God and passion for Jesus. And they spoke so freely about it. And I found myself wanting that. And I wasn't sure how to get there. But one night I was doing my homework and I came across John 9, verses 1 through 3. And it's the story of Jesus walking with his disciples, and they see a blind man on the side of the road. And the disciples say to Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? I still get choked up every time I talk about this. But that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I finally started to realize that, I was placing all of the blame and shame on myself for being a parent that could have a kid that was different from everybody else.
Right.
But then when I read the next line that was, neither this man nor his parents sinned, it was so that he could show the glory and the works of God. And I just broke down that night. And it was like a light went on, honestly. And I started to look at my son and say, oh my gosh, look at all the gifts and talents that he has. Look at all of the strengths that he has. I've been spending the last 3 years running like a maniac, trying to fix the things that I think are wrong, instead of recognizing the things that are so right. And that really started a journey that was, I did have that aha moment that night, but it took some additional time to really study and realize that my son was made exactly the way he was supposed to be made. He was made in God's image with gifts and talents that he is using to make the world a better place. And, it really hit home with the fact that Brady has his own faith. That was something I didn't think that he could have with an autism brain, but he actually does have a relationship with God, and he believes. And, the kind of the pinnacle of all of this journey that we went through is that he told me he wanted to be baptized in 2020.
Wow.
And then he asked me to be baptized with him. And I had been baptized as a child, but I actually talk about that in the book. It wasn't exactly an ideal baptism situation because I was a teenager and I was not into it. But he and I got up in 2020 and got baptized together, and it was just, I still get chills every time I think about it and talk about it. So,
Amen. Well, we're going to get more exciting conversation with Kari Baker in just a moment. We're talking about the book that she's written, Finding Kind, Discovering Hope and Purpose While Loving Kids with Invisible Neurological Differences. It's published by Blue Hat Publishing, and you're listening to Author's Corner, and I'm Roberta Foster. So, Kari, what did you notice first about your child, about Brady, that led you to investigate if there were issues that you needed to know about? Sure.
Well, so Brady walked on time and talked on time. So when we took him to his 2-year well check, the doctor said autism is off the table, ironically. But there were things that we definitely noticed. Mostly it was in how he related to other children. Okay. So I took him to preschool. He cried every day when I dropped him off. And then in the 3s, his teacher started sending an email out each evening with pictures of their activities during the day. And I noticed that when the other kids were in circle time, Brady was in the back of the room kind of rolling around on his back. My husband called it doing the cockroach. And, we asked the teachers about it, and they showed some concern. They said, well, yeah, he kind of hangs by himself, and when he speaks to us and we ask him a question, he kind of just repeats the question back instead of answering the question. He had definitely some very strange obsessive interests. He was very, very into the Wiggles, and he actually went past just watching them and got completely involved in the DVD covers. he would lay them out on the ottoman and just rock back and forth, staring at them intently. And so one day after a drop-off, I came home, and autism wasn't even in my brain. But I came home, and all of these things were just kind of swirling around in my head, and I picked up a magazine I normally never pick up, by the way, so this was another God thing.
Yes.
But I opened it up, and there was an article from a woman in there whose son was diagnosed with Asperger's as an adult. And I read through the article, and all of a sudden I started realizing that the way she described her son as a child was just like Brady. And at the bottom of that article, she had started, the woman's name is Patty Dion, and I've since gotten to meet her, which has just been a pure joy. But there was a link to thinkaspergers.com, and it was a 15-question quiz. And I took that quiz, and I answered every single question yes.
Wow.
And when I hit submit, it came back up on the screen that I should have my child evaluated for autism spectrum disorder. And honestly, at that point in time, I knew. I mean, there was no question in my mind that that's exactly what was going on. The questions that seemed kind of benign in the questionnaire just fit him to a T. And that really started our journey with the whole thing. And it's something now that's become a passion of mine. That same questionnaire is still being used, even though the term Asperger's isn't really diagnosed anymore. It's under the umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. There's an organization in my hometown in Phoenix, Arizona, and they are using that quiz to go into preschools and elementary schools to try to identify autism earlier, which is a big passion of mine, because the earlier you can get your kid diagnosed, the more positive impact you can have on how their brain functions. So
we're coming to the end of our time real quickly, but briefly tell our listening audience some advice that you have for parents who have a concern about their child's development.
Well, they can actually go to kindfamilies.com. I have that quiz on my website under the tools section. So, but my biggest thing is get it figured out, get an evaluation, because that evaluation, while it is scary, believe me, I know when you get that diagnosis in your hand, it can be frightening, but it's your roadmap. It's your roadmap to figure out the best way to help your child with the things he or she is struggling with. So, give yourself the time to grieve and then get up on your feet and start doing whatever you can to help them have the best life they can have. And then secondly, remember that your child, most importantly, was made on purpose for a purpose.
Yes.
And God doesn't make mistakes. And God made you that child's parent on purpose because he knows that you have exactly what they need. So don't ever forget that our identity is not in a diagnosis, and it's not in the people around us. It's in who God made us to be.
And I imagine that that's the purpose of your organization, is to help parents navigate the huge amount of information that they're going to have to know and learn in the future. Sure.
Well, and I'm not really giving them any kind of clinical advice. I just want to be there to tell people that it's okay, that it's hard, to encourage you and to give you hope. I mean, my son Brady wrote the foreword for this book. He's 13 years old now. And he still has autism. He still has ADHD. He still struggles with things, but he is one amazing kid. And I can't wait to see the things that he's going to go do in this world.
Fantastic. So I've been talking today with Kari Baker about her book, Finding Kind, Discovering Hope and Purpose While Loving Kids with Invisible Neurological Differences. So Kari, tell us more about how people can find the book and any resources that you make available.
Well, kindfamilies.com is the easiest way to get access to everything. I've got a tools page there. There is a link to buy the book on that website. And then the Kind Families podcast is on Apple and Spotify, and we come out with content every other week. So my latest one has my son on it. So if you want to hear directly from my son, Brady, that's a great episode to listen to.
Well, great. So one more time, the book today is Finding Kind, Discovering Hope and Purpose While Loving Kids with Invisible Neurological Differences. And I've been talking with Kari Baker. I certainly appreciate your time with us today, Kari. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to the listener, if you've missed any part of today's interview or would like to hear it again, you can now find it on your favorite podcast platform or through kneo.org. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. This is Roberta Foster on the Author's Corner. Join us again next time.